welcome back to Connected Farmer, your channel to keep you up to date with the latest trends in agriculture and livestock. Today we have Angie Setzer, finally a woman in our channel, and she's the vice president of the Citizens Elevator in Michigan, and she's also a podcaster. And Angie, how are you? How are
I'm
things
good.
up there in the north of the United States?
They're pretty good. We're waiting for the weather to warm up here. We've been pretty cold and wet, it feels like, since about October of last year. So we're ready for that warm, dry weather for sure. We've had about 5 inches of rain here in the last 5 days. And so it looks like the forecast is going to cooperate. So fingers crossed that we get some sun.
And what is the economic situation for your region in Michigan?
We're it's iffy. I guess you could say it really just depends. In agriculture, we had a rough year last year with a lot of prevented plant, a lot of just inability to really make a crop a year ago that was decent. Couple that with low quality on what did get planted because the test weight was down and things of that nature. So from a farmer standpoint, it's a little rough. We do have some customers that are doing relatively well still, but I would say all of them would have a list of requests, in ways that they could be doing better. So on the agriculture side of things, it's a little sticky here and there, both on the commercial side with some of the elevators and the professional members of the ag industry, and then on the farmer side. Outside of agriculture, it's too early to tell. Michigan is heavily reliant upon manufacturing, and what hasn't been reliant upon manufacturing, as we've seen, because we've gone through a pretty significant contraction in manufacturing over the last 30 years in our state. And so a lot of what has taken place, what has switched, what the jobs that we lost in manufacturing, we've kind of picked up in the service industry. And so obviously you're seeing some reduction in money on that side as well. So from an economic standpoint, I think outside of ag, I think we're in for probably what's going to be a pretty solid rough patch as a state.
Yes, and what are those requests that you told us that the farmers are doing for you?
Well, they're hoping that they can get a decent yield, obviously, from a crop standpoint, and a lot of them are hoping that we see the price improve. So, we've really struggled. We saw that big rally last summer. Unfortunately, when the prices were exceptionally high, not everyone knew what they would have to sell. And then, once the market kind of turned around a little bit there in August or September, and folks were still somewhat comfortable with what they had to sell, they kind of thought that there was this sort of overwhelming idea that the USDA would suddenly realize that we hadn't had the crop that folks thought we did. And we never got that. In fact, most people were waiting for a rally after the first of the year, and are still waiting for that rally, even though the market's now dropped 70 some cents. So that's made it a little rough, not to mention the fact that basis a year ago was 72 over in a lot of places. This year, you're lucky to have anything now. I mean, that had carried over for a while to where you could trade 30, 40 over basis into the ethanol plants. Now a lot of those are even to under the board too. So you've had the impact of the future loss and the impact of the basis loss. And so that's really kind of catapulted some P&Ls, some money sheets. So there's some folks that are really trying to figure out, what they can get from a resource standpoint when it comes to helping with maybe some operating expenses, or continuing on the farming side of things.
What has surprised me in these last weeks or the last month is the reaction of wheat prices. Are you also surprised?
um I try never to be surprised by wheat because it's wheat, right? And so I've always tell my customers, because we trade Chicago wheat. We have soft red winter wheat or soft winter wheat because we have some white wheat as well. So here in Michigan, I focus entirely on Chicago wheat. I don't trade any other kind of wheat. So a lot of times I'll get folks that'll come to me and say, "Well, did you see the Chicago Kansas City spread?" And I'm like, "No," because I mean, I'll look at it just to kind of see the relationship between the different varieties of wheat, but I would never dream of trading an inner wheat spread just because I don't live dangerously enough. But I always tell my customers in Chicago wheat to anything above 550 is generally a good sale. If you get close to 575 or $6, basically be prepared to get rid of it and be looking at what you have to sell as well for next year. So I'm not surprised that we've fallen off from that 550, 575. I think 590 was the high. Not surprised at all. Although I think it's a little bit premature. We did see some rains in the Black Sea region. We've had some other sort of issues develop from an export standpoint. Some things that are somewhat negative. But the reality is, from a production standpoint, our acres are still down. If we don't dry out in the eastern corn belt here, from a soft red wheat standpoint, you're going to have some pretty poor quality wheat here pretty soon, because a lot of it is in a point where you'll see vomitoxin develop, further south. For us, the weather in the next 3 weeks is going to be somewhat important to see what the quality looks like here. Which is why I hope the sun comes out and it dries out to kind of reduce the risk of fungus or anything like that. So as a whole, I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't want to try to test even, 483 or so seems to be a number that the front month likes to go to. Just looking at it at a glance, though, I haven't seen enough action in the spreads to say that wheat needs to go down forever. So I think it'll probably trade lower, catch a bid, and probably try to trade back up towards 525 to 550 again at some point over the next four weeks or so.
Yeah, and I think the other crops are more dependent on what's going on with the overall economy. In your case, in your county in Michigan, how much activity you have at this point?
We're starting to see more. I actually just commented to my husband last night that traffic has picked up. We're on a pretty, I would say, a main road for the most part. It's a pretty busy road, and it was extremely noticeable right after the shelter in place orders had been announced, the lack of traffic, the lack of people going anywhere. Typically we have a car every minute or two, go by. And when that order was put down, you didn't see anyone for a couple weeks. It was actually kind of eerie. It's back to normal now. I would say that a good majority of people are going places. It's warmer. We're going to want to plant flowers. We're going to want to go to the lakes. We're going to want to, here in Michigan especially, the tourism season really starts to pick up, and we don't need the things that they've closed. I mean, folks won't be going into stores, they'll be going to farmers markets, but they're going to be going places. So I would say that the activity has picked up, though the organized group activity, those still aren't happening. But as families and independent people, I believe we're seeing a lot more movement out of the house than what we were seeing 2 months ago.
Yes, everybody must have already realized that Angie is really smart, and she also has a podcast that is called The Business End of Farming. Tell us a little bit of what you discuss in your podcast.
Yeah, I've spent a lot of time just kind of focusing on helping farmers market better, or recognize some of I work with hundreds of farmers throughout the year, and there's several different types of farmer that you can work with. But the funny part is the different types all have similarities with one another, or you hate to categorize or prejudge someone based on the fact that they're in agriculture, but there really are distinct personality traits that you see, and things that are beneficial and things that are detrimental when it comes to marketing a crop. And so I spend a lot of time just kind of focusing on what that looks like. I'm in the process of doing a couple other things. I'm working on, because I merchandise cash grain, so I buy, I sell, I manage spreads and basis and things like that. And I feel that farmers can really benefit from that type of knowledge. How does an elevator trade grain? How does someone like me who runs commercial space make decisions in order to ensure a return on my investment, or a guaranteed sort of margin? And I feel that farmers can do that if they learn what the process is, and if they're willing to kind of put into practice some of these rules or things that I rely upon to make smart decisions. So I try to share that information with the farmers that I'm working with. And starting late next week, we're going to take that and convert it into more of a merchandising style class, kind of an intro to grain merchandising, done virtually. It's going to be a free course that I kind of offer through that blog, podcast, website sort of deal, and hopefully something that farmers will find beneficial.
And what's the feedback that you have received?
Really great stuff. I think there's a lot of folks that know what they need to do, but they don't really want to, or they know that they need to make a change, but they're so overwhelmed by what that looks like. And I feel that for farmers, there's a lot of information that comes out. You're inundated with info. And so I try to really kind of help provide a concise resource for folks to kind of, here's who you can talk to about something like that, or here's how you can, what steps you can take to kind of make this work in your operation, and things like that. So I've had some really good feedback from producers, that some of whom I would never have expected to even read it, have reached out and said thank you for putting that together. So it's been good. It's been hard to really kind of come up with content right now, because how do you talk about making decisions through a global pandemic? I mean, it's nothing that we've ever really had to do before. So I'm floating down the river, of unknowns, right along with my customers and stuff.
Yes,
So
we are all improvising a lot.
yeah, exactly. So
And how long have you been doing this?
15 years. So I started when I was 22, right before I turned 23 years old, fresh out of college, had no idea this was even a job. So I'm one of those folks that is, everything that I've learned from doing. I didn't even know that this was something you could do. So I've been doing it for 15 years, and been with Citizens now as the vice president of grain there for 10. I'm working on my 10th year.
Yeah, and it's the job that you love.
Yes. Yeah, it's definitely what I'm passionate about. So I'm very lucky to be one of those adults that gets to wake up every morning and be excited about what the day brings most of the time.
And what about podcasting? When did you start that?
I started with Girls Talk Ag probably 3 years ago. But as I picked up the business end of farming and kind of ran in a little bit of a different direction, I had to give something up. So Girls Talk Ag continues on without me, but I learned a lot about communication and conversation, by doing that. And so I started the business end of farming late last year, and hopefully we'll see that kind of continue to grow into something that is an organic resource for farmers to kind of turn towards and benefit from.
Angie Setzer, she is also known as the goddess of grain, and she could be also you can also contact her at the businessandthefarming.com. Thank you, Angie.
Thank you for having me.